There really are a number of different ways to create navigation for a website. You can have linked text, which is probably the most simple way to create navigation. You can use linked images, you can use CSS Sprites, you can use SVG. There are a number of different strategies. In this tutorial, we are going to cover how to create CSS or sprites with CSS. And so we're going to start with the images that you see here in Fireworks. So I have two sets of icons. I have the hover state icons, which you see on the left-hand side, and we have the link state icons, which are here on the right. And we're going to build the code, and I'm going to show you how to measure the X and Y coordinates for each of these images so that we can fill out our CSS and get our sprites to appear exactly the way we need them to appear. So first, what I'm going to do is set up this file so that I can get my coordinates really easily as I'm working on my HTML and CSS. So the way that I do this is I pull out guidelines and I run them on the left-hand side of each of the icons. And notice that my icons are all lined up along the left on each other. And I pull them also, these guidelines, against the very top. Oops, I knew better than to let that one go off the workspace. So I'm gonna not be pixel perfect, but I'm gonna get really close. And we'll see how I do here. A smarter person would actually zoom in on these images, so they were doing a better job. And I see that I'm way off. So let's try this one more time. There we go. Pull down my guidelines. So they're just touching the tops of the icons. And the reason I'm doing just the left and the right side is because what I want to look for is the intersection in the upper left-hand corner of each image. So you see we have an intersection here. We have an intersection of guidelines here, here, and here. The reason I want to go for that intersection is because the way that sprites work is that you have one single image that's serving the images for the menu that we're going to build. And the CSS moves that single image around to display the part of the image that we want for each of the buttons in the navigation. So think of it, for each button in the navigation, we're moving the background image, which is the sprite image, into this window that we're going to specify the size of using CSS, so only a small portion of the image shows at one time. And hopefully by the end of this tutorial you'll have a better picture of what that looks like conceptually. So I have my sprites, or my images, all set up here on my sprite image, and notice here I named this image icon-sprites. I'm going to save this. Don't forget to optimize your image, because when this goes onto the web you're going to want to make sure that your image is optimized, and so I optimized this one as a ping 32 and then saved it as icon-sprites.ping. Now, let's take a look at our HTML and our CSS. What we're going to do, let's make this a little bit bigger for you. What we're going to do to get started is just start with a basic list. So that's what we have here, a very basic HTML document, and in between our body tags, lines 9 and 16, we have an unordered list. It's unstyled right now. Notice that on lines 5 through 7, where we have our style tag, we don't have any styles or properties named. So if I were to take a look at this page right now, it doesn't look like much. It looks like a pretty boring unordered list. But we're going to change that. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the styles for this unordered list so that I can build the window that the images are going to show through. So let's start with that unordered list. So I'm going to, inside my style tags, use the UL unordered list selector, and I'm going to name a new style here. And I'm going to say that this unordered list is going to have a width of, let's say, 80 pixels. And I'm just ballparking that and being generous, because if we take a look back at each of these icons, if I select each one, you can see this one is 62 by 62 pixels. This one is 52 by 64, 62 by 64, 53 by 64. So I just want something right now that I know everything is going to fit into. Yes, I could probably use a smaller number, but you can sit down and play with those on your own time. So width, sorry, I forgot to type that when we first started. I'm going to turn off the margins for this unordered list, so margin 0 and padding 2. And margins is in plural, that's why it's red. There we go. Padding, also 0. I'm also going to turn off the bullets. So I will say list style type, which is going to let me name how I want those bullets to show up. I want them to not be there at all, so I'll say none, like so. So now my unordered list has no bullets, like so. So no more bullets. And what we're going to do at this point is start adding some styles to our list item themselves. And these are going to help us narrow down how big that window is that's going to show over the images, so that only one image at a time is displayed when we're building our navigation. So we're going to create little blocks. Think of those blocks as windows. So we're going to select our unordered list, and then what we're going to do, oops, instead of unordered list, we'll say unordered all list items in our unordered list. We'll create a rule here. So they will have a height of 64 pixels. And if you remember when I was just going over the size of those icons here, 64 was the largest dimension that I encountered as I was going through each of these. So nothing here is wider or taller than 64 pixels. So I don't need my window to be any taller than that. So that's why my height is going to be set here for my list item as 64 pixels. And by default, our list items are not displayed as blocks. The unordered lists are, but not the list items themselves. So I'm going to say display block, like so. And the next thing I'm going to do is create some style rules for our anchors. So you can see we have links here right now. And what I want to do is also set some block dimensions for these anchors, same way that we did for our list item. So I'm going to say here, inside of this unordered list, all anchors are going to have the following styles. We'll say they're going to have a width of 64 pixels, and a height of 64 pixels. And then we will also make these display as blocks, because anchors by themselves are inline elements by default. So we need to force them to be blocks. So we'll say display block terrible time spelling block today. And then finally, we're just going to align these things to the center. I have some luck doing this. You may use a different technique. That's up to you. I learned this way and I've had success. So I'm going to say text align center for my list, or for my anchors. So what I've done here is I've created a block that is going to serve as that window to place over my sprite image. Again, my sprite image is here. And each time that block or that window is over a particular part of my sprite image, that part of the image only will show. Back to our code. So our list isn't going to look like anything special at the moment, because what ends up happening is our navigation is going to be image-based, and we have text here right now in between our open and close anchor tags. I'm going to get rid of this text because we're going to replace them, or the text, with images. Those images are going to be our icons. So let's get rid of those. So all of the magic happens with IDs that we're going to create for each of our anchors, each one of our list items. So each navigation item is going to have its own ID. When we're creating HTML and using CSS, where we have unique styles for blocks on the page, we can use IDs to specify those unique styles. It gives us capability to assign properties to a very specific item on the page. So going back up in my styles, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an ID for each of my buttons. I'm going to have a button for pics, a button for docs, a button for time, and a button for tags. And if you remember, these are the icons: pics, docs, time, tags. And what we're going to do is we need two sets of IDs here. What we want to style are the anchors themselves. We want to style the link state. So that's what the links will look like when they're not active. And we also want to style the hover state. So when somebody rolls over our links, we want those icons to change from one state to another state. This is what they used to do with rollover images. This is what we used to use when we used JavaScript to drive navigation. We don't need to do that anymore. CSS does that for us. We don't need all the extra code. We're eliminating all of that extra JavaScript that we used to use. We were only using one image instead of 8 images. So we have one call back to the server to get that image instead of 8 calls back to the server whenever that navigation is loaded. And that's important. It's important because when you're running a large site, that's a lot of traffic on the server. Smaller sites, it's not going to matter so much. But if you're running a site like Amazon or Yahoo, any of the really big sites, and even the mid-sized sites, those calls back to the server really start to add up and slow things down. All right, so let's take a look at our IDs. To create an ID, we start with the hash or £. So I have an ID for pics. So my ID is for anchors. And I'm going to say for each of these, I want to affect the background. And I'm going to use shorthand here, so I'm going to change the background image. I'm going to change the coordinates that we're going to move on that image, and I'm going to specify that the image doesn't repeat. All for one property. So we'll do this. We're going to set our background image first, so URL. And what did I name my image? It's up here in my project folder, icon-sprites.png. Alright, and then my coordinates. So my first set of coordinates, I'm going to label them first x and y, because whenever we work with coordinates, we always use x first and y second. And if you take a look, I have my cursor in the upper left-hand corner of my first icon, and there are the x and y coordinates in my info panel. The coordinates are 7, 7. Notice that this image is my hover state image, and we're not doing that yet. So let's move over to my link state image. This one is going to be 76, and 7. So we need to move this image to the left 76 pixels, and to the we'll need to move it up 7 pixels. So we need to move in negative directions. So if that didn't confuse you enough, we're going to say first we're going to move 76 pixels to the left, and 7 pixels up. X, and no repeat, because we don't want our background image to repeat. I'm going to end that shorthand with a semicolon, because I'm ending the properties here. And there. That's all I'm going to do. That's all I'm going to specify for the pix ID. I'm going to follow a similar pattern for my docs, my time, and my tags ID as well. Same pattern, and you'll see here after a little bit, hopefully you'll get the hang of it. So I'm going to say docs. So this particular anchor is going to have a background. Oops. And I'm going to specify the same image. So for each one of these IDs, we're calling the same image all of the time. We're just moving the coordinates around. Like that. And this time our coordinates are going to be, I'm going down because my next set of icons, my next icon is the page. So it's going to be 76 and 93. So I need to move to the left 76 pixels and up 93 pixels. So I'm going to move in negative directions. Left 76 px for pixels, and up 93. So minus 93 pixels. No repeat. Alright, this is going to take a long time, so you know what? I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to copy and paste these and just go back and change my coordinates. So, well, let's also change our IDs. So I have a docs ID, I have a time ID, and I have a tags ID. Like so. Now let's change our coordinates. So the coordinates for this is going to be what? It's going to be minus 76 and 181. Notice that that first set of x coordinates, well actually the x coordinates, they're not going to change for this set. If I go over to tags, you'll see it's still going to be 76, only this, instead of being about 76, if I can get my cursor right, it's going to be 76 and 264. So we'll move up minus 264. Okay, so that's our link state. Everything's great, but they don't show up because what I've neglected to do is name my IDs down here for each of my list items. So I've named them here in my styles. I need to place them down here for my list. So I will say ID equals pix. I also have a list item where the ID equals docs. ID equals time. And then finally, ID equals tags. There we go. Now, I'm going to save my changes. Let's preview this. Now we have images. There we go. So these are the regular link state images. We haven't specified our rollover images, so when we roll over here, they don't do anything yet. That's fine. Doing the rollover states is very simple, and like I said before, this is all about pattern matching. So what I'm going to do is copy everything we did for the link state, move down a little bit inside my styles, and this time all I'm going to adjust first, instead of changing the link state, we're going to change the hover state. So we're going to do this. So every time somebody rolls over these, we'll get a different image. And to call those different images, we need to change our coordinates. So let's go back to our graphic here, and this time I'm looking at the left column of icons. So this is going to be 7, 7. And let's go back to our style sheet. -7 and -7. Excellent. The next icon is going to be -7 and 93 if my hand is steady. So we're going to see a pattern here. Whoops, I need to come down here. -7 and 93. We don't need to change what's in the left or on the right for our y coordinates. We only need to change our x coordinates here. The next icon is going to be, let's see, it'll be 7 and 181. Even though my hand isn't steady, I know that's what it's going to be. So 7 and 181, and you know, hopefully you're seeing the pattern by now. This one's going to be 7 and 264. Save these changes, and we should now take a look at the preview and see our rollover state happening. So we have our images, and now we have our rollovers like so, and notice that there's no shift. There's a drop shadow that appears in our rollover state, but the images themselves aren't jumping around. So when you're making your menu, make sure that your icons don't jump around. So you have to be pixel perfect on these. Alright, so just to recap, let's make this window a little bit smaller so you can see all the code at once. What we did first was we started with an unordered list, and so you still see it down here. We had our unordered list, and we applied a background image. In that background image, you can see the preview and the flyout here. That background image contains all the images that we are using for our navigation. And all we need to do for the sprite navigation is specify the coordinates where we want this block that we specified up here in our list item and our anchor properties to appear over these particular areas of the image. And that's how we created this navigation. Oh, I need to pop it back open for you. That's how we created this navigation here. And wherever you see sprite navigation on the web, this is how they're creating it.